So like many of you, I'm a massive fan of Game of Thrones, and I've created my own fan-made continuation of the Game of Thrones story, sort of imagining the events that might have happened after Season 8. So this is the whole of the first season, or Season 9, that I have created. Please enjoy. It is a particularly dark and dreary night as King Bran the Broken sits alone within the Great Hall. But he is not truly there, for he is elsewhere searching, when suddenly a voice appears from out the shadows. Your Grace? It was Sir Podrick Payne of the King's Guard. Bran suddenly snaps out of his trance. It has been several months, yet I still cannot find her. I'm sure she will appear soon, Your Grace. I hope so, for a terrible storm is coming. It has been 2 years since the end of the Great War and the fall of the Mad Queen Daenerys, and the situation within the Six Kingdoms is starting to return to some sort of normality. Repairs on the capital city of King's Landing have largely concluded, and the terrible plague known as the Sleeping Sickness has been largely contained, due in large parts to the efforts made by Archmaester Samwell Tarly. And most importantly, the people of King's Landing are finally starting to feel safe. Now there has been some changes to the small council, however. Tyrion Lannister, head of House Lannister, Lord of Casterly Rock and Warden of the West, still sits as Hand of the King. Sir Davos, Lady Brienne and Samwell Tarly still sit on the small council as well. However, Lord Bronn, head of House Blackwater and Lord Paramount of the Reach, has been removed as Master of Coin due to his rather poor management of the economy by prioritising certain projects over others. However, he doesn't really mind, as he is quite content to be Lord of the Reach still. He has been replaced by Sir Leighton Hightower, who has finally ventured down from the High Tower to become Master of Coin, mostly because of his hatred towards House Blackwater. Another new addition is the Master of War, Lord Royce, who was awarded this position due to his heroic actions and stout leadership during the Dothraki Rebellion. As of yet, there is no Master of Whispers, but perhaps King Bran has a plan. Speaking of which, the Dothraki have been given valuable farming land within the Crown Lands, where they remain mostly content, but this is mainly due to the fact that they fear King Bran the Broken, rather than them being loyal to Westeros, as they still despise the Westerosi. The remaining Dothraki have been charged with protecting the King's Road against bandits, a job which they are particularly good at. Far to the north stands the independent kingdom of the North. Ruled over by Queen Sansa Stark, this kingdom has known 2 years of peace, rebuilding and finally prosperity. To the west, however, stands the Iron Islands, where there are rumblings of independence once more, as Queen Yara Greyjoy has no love for the crippled king, as she finally plans to fulfill her dream of putting the Iron Islands on the map. So Westeros is largely at peace, but across the narrow sea it is a different story. Far to the north, on a particularly cold and eerie night, Jon Snow sits alone in his cabin, pondering over a map of what lies beyond the wall, when suddenly he hears a familiar voice coming from the doorway.
Bloody hell, lad, are you still looking at that map?
It was Tormund Giantsbane. Maps don't redraw themselves, boy, if that's what you're waiting for.
It's not that, Tormund.
It's all these stories I've been hearing.
What stories, eh?
Stories of giant spiders, of mad men with red skin eating people alive. Ha! I'll tell you exactly what that is, boy. Us free folk are proud people,
and we don't like to admit when we're wrong.
All those stories are free folk who left, got hungry, and now have come back with their tails between their legs. Stop fretting, boy, and have a bloody drink. After Jon was exiled, he travelled far to the north, beyond the wall, with the remaining free folk. He hoped for a quiet life, but he secretly knew he wasn't going to get one, as the free folk looked to him as a leader, even king, but this was the title he definitely didn't want. So along with the help of his old friend Tormund Giantsbane, Jon Snow took it upon himself to find his people a home, and finally tried to unite them in peace. And after several months, they found such a home, just north of the Fist of the First Men, to a perfect place where 2 freshwater rivers met, and a large mountain range to the north to protect against blizzards, and to the east a large forest perfect for hunting and wood gathering. Under Jon's leadership, the free folk were able to build themselves a thriving thriving settlement. Using the lumber they had gathered, they were able to create themselves wooden cabins. Now, although these were fairly simple and a far cry from the houses of Westeros, they were certainly better than caves and tents. For the most part, the free folk lived in peace, farming and hunting. But of course, these were the free folk, so there were definitely a lot of fights and brawls. But these were quickly ended with a few steins of ale. Now, not all free folk liked this life, and there were still those who hadn't forgiven him for killing Mance. There were many among the free folk, especially the Fens, who believed that Jon was trying to domesticate them and turn them into southerners. As they put it, "We're making pretty houses. Soon they'll be bigger and prettier. Then we'll get bigger and prettier until some of us start calling ourselves lords and ladies. Then we'll be just like the southerners." These free folk abandoned Jon and the settlement and headed north, calling themselves the true folk and labeling all others as sleeping folk. And now these same free folk are returning with strange and haunting tales. Tales of ice spiders and wild men whose skin is stained red with blood and who eat the flesh of their victims while they're still alive. Many in the settlement believe this is just a fairy tale, but Jon isn't so sure. He recalls stories from his childhood, tales of a haunting place called Cannibal Bay. This place was said to trap unsuspecting ships in ice, and their crews would be eaten alive by feral cannibals. Jon had often wondered if these stories were true, why didn't these cannibals try and return south? But now he's starting to think, what if it was the White Walkers that were keeping them out? And now that the White Walkers are gone, there is nothing stopping an avalanche of insane cannibals from descending south. But it's just a silly story, right? A point of controversy within the North is what to do about the Wall and the Night's Watch. For thousands of years, the Night's Watch have been the shield which guards the realms of men. But now that the White Walkers are gone and the free folk are the North's allies, the Night's Watch seem to be relics of a bygone age. And now that the Wall has been irreparably damaged, many have questioned just how effective the Night's Watch can truly be. No one in the North has the knowledge to rebuild the Wall, and some question if the Wall is even necessary. This has been a major sticking point for both the Northern Lords and Queen Sansa, who understand both the historical and cultural significance of the Wall and the Night's Watch, but also question their relevance in this new age. Many in the North believe that the Wall is too much of an important icon to let fall to ruin. Some have petitioned that instead of the Night's Watch, the Wall should be made into a penal colony, where the North can send their prisoners and convicts, where they can serve out their sentences maintaining and being the caretakers for the Wall. This plan would effectively disband the Night's Watch. However, many others have stressed the importance of the Night's Watch and why the North needs them. These lords do not trust the wildlings and believe that the threat is not yet over. The free folk are mostly united in peace under the rule of Jon Snow, but some have questioned just how long Jon Snow can maintain this peace, and just how long it can be until the free folk return to their old ways. For now, it seems that a sort of compromise has been reached. The Night's Watch shall continue. They will also be able to recruit from the prison populations as well, but their mandate is now slightly altered, as not only do they act as the shield which guards the realms of men, but they also act as envoys between the North and the free folk, passing on messages between the two sides and being responsible for guarding the various trade missions north of the Wall. But now, like everywhere else in Westeros, times are changing, as it would seem that the need for military garrisons on the Wall is becoming more and more apparent. Yet again, many free folk are fleeing south of the Wall, raiding and pillaging as they go. Captured free folk tell tales of giant ice spiders, as well as the feral men who are coming down from the lands of Always Winter, hell-bent on carnage. Despite suffering tremendous damage during the Great War, the North has surprisingly bounced back stronger, a testament to the resilience of the Northerners. But the stalwart leadership of Queen Sansa Stark cannot be overlooked. Sansa Stark, Queen of the North, rules the North from her seat on the Wolf's Throne. Although the North has started to prosper again, it has been a very hard 2 years. Immediately after the death of Queen Daenerys and the rise of King Bran, the Northern army quickly marched home, where it was immediately disbanded, with the soldiers in the army returning back to their homes to desperately try to salvage what they could. Both the wars and the winter had done their damage. The North was in ruins. Starvation, disease and banditry was rampant in the North, and with the Northern army disbanded, there was very little that Queen Sansa could do about the bandits, and she could hardly ask her brother King Bran for help, as this could potentially make her look weak and nothing but a southern puppet. that. But Queen Sansa had matured much in her years and was far more intelligent than many gave her credit for. She understood she could not do everything by herself. She surrounded herself with loyal and very capable advisors, such as Lord Glover and Lord Manderley, both very intelligent, very wise men, and both fiercely loyal to her and her family, although she has not entirely forgiven Lord Glover for his betrayal of her brother Jon Snow. Although Queen Sansa listens to everything that her advisors tell her, but she is no fool. Her years of experience has taught her that even the most honourable and loyal men always have their own agendas, and Sansa is very mindful of this. That is one of the main reasons why she has not chosen a husband for herself, as she cannot afford division in the north at this time. The north itself has also changed, with many northern families being wiped out during the various wars, and new lords and families have had to be chosen to watch over these lands. Many of these territories have been given to knights who proved themselves during the Great War and the war against Cersei, being elevated to the title of lord and being given the status as a house. Apart from House Mormont, however, that is now ruled over by a very distant Mormont bastard called Jarek. He was an illegitimate son of House Mormont, but Queen Sansa officially legitimized him. He now rules as Jarek Mormont. Within these 2 years, many of the northern castles have been rebuilt, apart from the seat of House Bolton, the Dreadfort, which upon the orders of Queen Sansa was torn down and destroyed, and Queen Sansa has forbidden any castles from being built on this land. The situation in the north is not, however, as rosy as the Starks like to make out. Queen has made her fair share of mistakes, and as a result has created some pretty powerful enemies. Not only that, but several months ago she ventured to King's Landing to talk with her brother. She did not recognise the man who sat on the Iron Throne, but it was certainly not her brother. This has worried the north greatly, as it seems that King Bran has no loyalty towards his former home. Because of this, and under the advice of her advisors, Queen Sansa has ordered that the northern army be rebuilt, and she cannot allow family loyalty to cloud her judgment. The north must remain strong. On a dark night, on a forsaken ship located in a hidden cove, a shadowy figure is plotting. Send word to our supporters on the Iron Islands. The reign of Queen Yara ends now. Tonight, we reclaim our father's legacy. In the 2 years since the fall of Queen Daenerys, the Iron Islands have gone through a massive upheaval. The Ironborn are strange and fickle people, and it is no secret that many, especially among the houses of the Iron Islands, are not happy about being ruled over by a woman. Yara Greyjoy commands great respect and loyalty among those who serve under her, and she commands great admiration among the people of the Iron Islands. Her supporters are many, but so are her naysayers. Now she must walk a dangerous path. Yara's official title is Lady of Pike and Lord Paramount of the Iron Islands, but in secret she seeks Ironborn independence and to make herself queen. She is fed up with how the Westerosi look down and scorn her people, and she seeks to make them a true power, but this is easier said than done. Many of the Drowned God's more fanatical priests have denounced Yara as a heretic and a usurper, and adamantly stand against her attempts to do away with the old ways which saw the Drowned priests wield much influence and power. These renegade priests have attracted a large following of the Drowned God's more overzealous followers. Even more disturbing are the reports that Merling worship have begun to resurface on the Iron Islands. This heretical belief, which practiced human sacrifices to eldritch fish creatures, was once thought to be extinct on the mainland, but now these cults are starting to resurface, and many say this is the work of House Farwind, the only house which is known to practice Merling worship. Yara is facing opposition on almost all fronts, and the absence of the Ironborn during the Dothraki Rebellion has not gone unnoticed by the Iron Throne. Yara knows that Westeros suspects her intentions, and she also knows that if the Iron Islands don't stand united, they will not stand a chance against the might of the Six Kingdoms. But far to the east, there is something that she fears more than all of these other issues. The twins, Little Euron and Irina, the wretched spawn of Euron Greyjoy. They are both cunning tacticians, skilled warriors and fearsome pirates. It is rumoured that they command a fleet of over 100 ships, crewed by some of the most feared cutthroats and killers in the world, and they are coming to reclaim what they believe is rightfully theirs and retake their father's throne. In the 2 years since the fall of Queen Daenerys, the Westerlands have faced much upheaval. Tyrion Lannister has been named Lord of Casterly Rock and Warden of the West, but he is facing much resistance to his rule. The Lords of the West despise Tyrion, they still consider him a traitor. After all, he killed his father Lord Tywin Lannister and he aided Queen Daenerys in the overthrow of Queen Cersei, so now both he and King Bran are hated in the West. Tyrion has tried his best to win over the loyalty of the Westerlands, but to no avail. Every policy he tries to implement, no matter how good or beneficial it is rejected out of hand by the Lords of the West. Because of this, he has adopted a sort of Daenerys-style policy, trying to win over the hearts and minds of the small folk, and this has had some success, as after all, the small folk care more about surviving than they do about which lord they have to bend the knee to. Tyrion hopes that if he can get the small folk on board, eventually the lords will have to like him and support him, but this is a very dangerous game, as many of the lords consider this an attempt to subvert their authority, and it's not like Tyrion can use the Lannister army to enforce his rule, as the Lannister army is but a shell of its former self. Many of its best warriors were killed during the war and many still had to flee Westeros after an attempted coup. Not long after Tyrion first came to Casterly Rock, he was met with an attempted coup on him. Several high-ranking Lannister commanders who were still fiercely loyal to Cersei and Lord Tywin gathered their soldiers and attempted to overthrow Tyrion, but luckily Casterly Rock was an almost impregnable fortress, and the garrison had no prior knowledge of the coup, so they had absolutely no idea who was attacking the Casterly Rock. If they had been informed, maybe things would have played out differently. The loyalists were able to hold the rebels off for long enough for reinforcements from the Riverlands to arrive, and successfully routed the rebellious commanders, eventually fleeing across the narrow sea with their soldiers, going on to create the sellsword company called the Tattered Lions and swearing eternal vengeance against Tyrion and the crown. Despite winning the battle, the fact that Tyrion had to rely on the Riverlands to help proved to many that he was weak and he could not defend his house, so it has certainly not been an easy 2 years for Tyrion. He is slowly rebuilding House Lannister, its reputation and its army. Tyrion replaced much of the old guard of the Lannister army with new, fresh commanders who are loyal to him. He has also gifted houses and titles to other loyalists, so Tyrion is attempting to use the tried and true methods of bribery and gift giving to ensure people's loyalty, something that is slightly working, but recent events has forced Tyrion to spend much of his time in the capital. As a result, the West is now ripe for rebellion. In the 2 years since the fall of Queen Daenerys, the Riverlands have become increasingly unstable. The Riverlands is ruled over by Edmure Tully, Lord of Riverrun and Lord Paramount of the Riverlands, himself a brash, arrogant and very narrow-minded leader, who commands little respect among his people, from the highborn to the small folk to even his soldiers. Many within the Tully army have not forgotten or forgiven Edmure's betrayal of the Blackfish, a man well respected and admired by those under his command, and Lord Edmure has been unable to command even a fraction of the loyalty that his uncle did. Lord Edmure has attempted to address his unpopularity in the past. In the past, he frequently left Riverrun to try and visit his lords and other towns, but more often than not he would find himself at the end of an attempted assassination. Thus he avoids leaving Riverrun unless it is under heavy escort, something which definitely sends the wrong message. He rules in Riverrun alongside his wife Rosalind Frey, now known as Rosalind Tully, and their son Little Hoster Tully. However, unfortunately this is a loveless marriage, as Lord Edmure is certain that Rosalind played a part in the Red Wedding, although she strongly denies this. Speaking of those who perpetrated the Red Wedding, House Frey still exists. However, it is but a shadow of its former glory, as most of its lands had been seized after the war. It now only controls a small segment of land around the twins. House Frey, or what's left of it, is currently ruled over by Kitty Frey, the young wife of the late Walder Frey. Kitty is lowborn and does not understand the great game. She, alongside the rest of Walder Frey's daughters, who were not harmed during the massacre at the twins, they have been given a simple task to make sure the twins remain open for traffic, something that is extremely easy to do, and the Freys have so far not had any issues with it. However, it is no secret that Lord Edmure despises House Frey. He, alongside the the other Riverlords would have much rather burnt their house to the ground. However, the remaining Freys were pardoned by King Bran during the infamous Council of Crows, an event which has caused much controversy within the Six Kingdoms. Knowing that he cannot wipe them out, Lord Edmure secretly hopes that one day he will have a second son who can inherit the twins. Relations between the Riverlands and the Iron Throne are certainly not the best. Relations started to deteriorate after the infamous Council of Crows, and they have since been exacerbated after King Bran ordered the Riverlands to cede a large plot of land south of the Isle of Faces to the Dothraki. Something that is very interesting is that despite the death of Thoros of Myr and Beric Dondarrion, the Brotherhood without banners still exists, and surprisingly they have gone from strength to strength. They steal food from the small folk and help them out wherever they can. As a result, the small folk have begun to view the Brotherhood as heroes. They now rule over several small towns within the Riverlands, and their numbers have swollen so greatly that they have now begun to engage Tully forces in open combat. In the 2 years since the fall of Queen Daenerys, the Vale has been perhaps the most prosperous kingdom within the Six Kingdoms. The Vale is ruled over by young Robin Arryn. Young Robin would be completely unrecognisable from the child that he once was. This is due in large part to his tutelage by Lord Royce. He has changed greatly from the spoilt, self-entitled child that he once was. Lord Royce took a firm yet fair hand with the young boy, moulding him into the man he is today, and without Littlefinger to constantly manipulate him, he was able to blossom into the man his father hoped he would become. Under his rule and the watchful eye of Lord Royce, the Vale has known prosperity and peace. The hill tribes are most certainly still an issue for the Vale. However, Lord Robin is trying to rectify this by taking a much more softer approach with the hill tribes. He understands that at the end of the day, the hill tribes just want to be left alone to live in peace, and continually sending your knights to raid and destroy their homes is not a good way to achieve peace. These raids have stopped, and Robin is attempting to pursue peace with the hill tribes, and in all fairness, some of these tribes have begun to accept this peace, as attacks upon travellers have definitely become less frequent. Robin is still governed largely by his emotions, but he has been able to turn this largely to his advantage, becoming a very compassionate ruler, garnering the love of his people. However, he is still prone to emotional outbursts. These can sometimes get very heated and very embarrassing, and now that Lord Royce sits upon the small council as Master of War, he is no longer around to control these outbursts, so Lord Robin will have to figure it out on his own. Both Lord Royce, Robin and the Vale as a whole are very loyal to the king. They both sided with the king during the Council of Crows, believing this was the best course of action for the Six Kingdoms. Now, despite the large amount of prosperity within the Vale, there is still problems, mostly from the Three Sisters, who are yet again seeking greater autonomy and who secretly wish to become independent like the North. So far, their petitions for greater autonomy have been rejected by House Arryn, so they are now looking towards more direct methods to achieve their goals. In the 2 years preceding the fall of Queen Daenerys, the Stormlands have found themselves in a rather odd predicament. Queen Daenerys legitimised Gendry, last son of King Robert Baratheon, and named him as the true heir to Storm's End, a decision that King Bran honoured, but Gendry has certainly not had the easiest of times. The people of the Stormlands are proud people, most of all their lords, and they were certainly not happy about naming one of King Robert's many bastards as their liege lord. Gendry understood this, and he realised what a precarious situation this put him in. Although new to the great game, Gendry caught on and learned it very quickly. He understood that the dance of politics was just as cutthroat as the streets of King's Landing, so he took the lessons he learned there and put them into practice here. He laughed, he drank, he held great tourneys and fights for his soldiers. Although from the outside it just looked like Gendry was being a foolish drunkard, this was all part of a far more intricate plan to win over the warriors of the Stormlands. After seeing how Gendry acted around them, seeing that he did not believe that he was better than them and he treated everyone as equals, all the well-respected veteran knights and warriors saw within Gendry his father's flame, and in time every knight from the island of Qarth to the Marcher Lords swore their allegiance to Gendry Baratheon. In doing this, Gendry has outplayed the lords of the Stormlands. In building this mighty host, that he has made himself almost untouchable, and even some of the Stormland houses have started to see what the Knights of the Stormland see in Lord Gendry. Unfortunately, many believe that Gendry is taking this equality among his warriors a bit too far, as he has created the Warriors' Lodge, a place where any warrior, knight or lord can visit and say whatever they want to each other, as rank has no meaning here. Originally it was designed to bring warriors and their lords closer together, but Gendry is spending far too much time there and is listening far too much to the advice of these warriors, and he cannot see the threat which is marshalling against him, an ancient house which has long been the rivals and enemies of the Baratheons. House Fel even remained loyal to the Targaryens during the Robert's Rebellion, with Robert cutting down Lord Fel during the Battle of Summerhall, and the Fels have never truly forgiven the Baratheons for this. They have been waiting for their opportunity, and they now believe an opportunity has presented itself as they prepare to strike. After the fall of Queen Daenerys, it would appear that on paper at least, Dorne was in a very favourable position. Their contribution to the war against Cersei was minuscule, therefore their armies and their economy remained largely intact, but under the surface things were not so well. Only a matter of weeks after Queen Daenerys' death, the Prince of Dorne was found dead. It appeared that he had been poisoned. At first the Dornish believed it had to be the work of the Iron Throne, as like the Iron Islands, Dorne sought its independence, but it was then found out that the poison used was only known to the Dornish, therefore it had to be an internal assassination. As the prince left no clear heir, it was unclear who would rule Dorne, so the remaining members of House Martell formed a conclave in Sunspear to elect a new prince. Little did House Martell know that this was all part of a darker plot to destroy them. As you see, House Martell hid a dark shame, one which they kept secret from outsiders. This was a breakaway sect of House Martell. This was formed during one of the many Blackfire rebellions, as various Martell bastards swore their allegiance to the Blackfires. In exchange, the Blackfires gave them the title of a great house and named them the true lords of Dorne, and thus House Darkblade was formed. Although this house fled after the Blackfires were unsuccessful, they have since taken up residence in the free city of Lys, where they have been building their strength, and now they plot to overthrow House Martell. And for months, even predating the fall of Queen Daenerys, House Darkblade had been secretly sending assassins into Sunspear, where they waited for all the members of House Martell to be in one place so they could strike. And that day came when the conclave was called. But just before the assassination was to take place, a Martell sentry caught wind and alerted the others. Thus a bloody battle ensued within Sunspear. The assassins proved to be formidable warriors, with each one cutting down 5 Martell soldiers before being slain. But eventually the assassins were defeated, but the damage was done. After the dust had settled, only one member of House Martell still lived, a young 18-year-old woman named Elia Martell. Being the last member of House Martell, she was immediately made Princess of Dorne. During the battle she had proven herself a formidable warrior, but she was inexperienced in the art of leading and politics, and she was dubbed the Young Serpent. Many of the Dornish nobility tried to take advantage of this by attempting to influence the young princess, and many of the minor houses attempted to marry their sons to her, but they could not make a move on her directly, as the Martell army was still very much loyal to her and her house. Elia must now try to keep Dorne intact and her people safe, but a few upstart nobles are the least of her worries, for in the city of Lys, House Darkblade is regrouping. They suffered a setback, yes, but they consider this still a victory. Over the years, the Darkblades have amassed a large amount of wealth and gathered a huge army with an elite corps of female assassin warriors called handmaidens. They have also successfully formed an alliance with Lys and Tyrosh. Before, House Darkblade came with assassins to take Dorne. Now they will come with armies. In the 2 years preceding the fall of the Mad Queen, perhaps none of the Six Kingdoms were as turbulent as the Reach. Sir Bronn of the Blackwater, a once cutthroat and sellsword turned lord of one of the wealthiest and most fertile kingdoms in Westeros. He was made Master of Coin, Lord Paramount of the Reach and Lord of Highgarden by King Bran the Broken at the request of his Hand of the King Tyrion Lannister. Since then, House Blackwater has ruled over the Reach with an iron fist. Bronn may be many things, but he is no fool. He knows that the noble houses of the Reach despise him and that they seek to overthrow him, and ever since he has been removed from the small council, he is fully aware that royal protection may not be so forthcoming. Bronn may not understand the dance of politics, but he knows people, more specifically the very lowest of the people, the cutthroats, the brigands, the killers, the sellswords. He knows how they think and he knows how to use them. In every alehouse, in every gutter of the Reach, you will find such people, and Bronn knows how to utilize them. For example, say a lord is getting particularly belligerent, like not paying their taxes or openly criticizing Sir Bronn. He may suddenly find his lands be set on by bandits and brigands, coming in numbers the likes of which he has never seen before. They mercilessly raid his fields, attack his caravans. The lord can do nothing but hide within his castle. That is, of course, until he falls back into line. Then mysteriously the bandits all seemingly vanish. For a time this method proved exceptionally effective, and Sir Bronn kept the lords in line through fear and intimidation, but all this has now changed. Now the lords have banded together. When a lord's lands are beset on by bandits, other nearby lords will send soldiers to help rid them of this plague. This tactic has proven most effective. Best of all, Bronn cannot intervene, as if he does, he would be publicly admitting that he was responsible for the bandits. Led by the ancient and well-respected House Hightower, the other houses of the Reach have become ever more critical of House Blackwater, certainly not helped by the ascension of Sir Leighton Hightower to the Master of Coin, a position once held by Sir Bronn. Sir Bronn has asked his old friend Tyrion as to why he would be so stupid to do this, but this was King Bran's choice, not Tyrion's, and the truth is, not even the small council understand King Bran's motives anymore. He is cold, distant, and seemingly uncaring, but none of this helps House Blackwater, who are considered pariahs among the other houses. House Blackwater is corrupt, disreputable, and dishonourable. Because of all this, no self-respecting knight or soldier will fight for this house, so House Blackwater has had to recruit dishonourable knights and brigands to staff its army. Not exactly the kind of army you want to put down a full-scale uprising. Faced with this impossible situation, Bronn is becoming ever more desperate in order to keep his grasp on power, but we must remember that a wild animal is never more dangerous than it is once it has been backed into a corner. On a relatively pleasant day in King's Landing, Lord Duskin is bringing grievances to the small council.
What are you planning on doing about these damned savages?
You mean the Dothraki? Asked Sam. Tyrion is quick to respond. They are under the king's protection, and therefore you are to show them respect.
King? What king? We barely see that cripple.
Sir Brienne sharply looks up. I would advise against insulting his grace in the presence of his king's guard. Now I would suggest you leave his house as soon as possible. In the 2 years since the fall of Queen Daenerys, the Dothraki horde have been whittled down to but a shell of their former glory. Immediately after her death, the Dothraki refused to bend the knee to King Bran. Instead, they vowed to set Westeros on fire. But they had no leader, so there was a huge internal power struggle among the Dothraki warriors. Many of their best fighters fell during this time, until a young hot-headed warrior called Karl Hennet rose to power, and he immediately set out with his horde to put Westeros to the torch. First he went to the Riverlands, where he smashed the Tully army. Lord Edmure was barely able to escape with his life. Now the real problem began. As you see, no one in Westeros really had an army. Both the Lannister and Baratheon armies were virtually non-existent. Bronn was seriously struggling to unite the Reach under his rule. Dorne had their own internal issues and were in no mood to help out. The Iron Islands weren't really that interested, as they knew there was a sea between the Ironborn and the Dothraki. The Knights of the Vale had been largely decimated, and the Northern army had largely disbanded in order to go home and try to salvage what they could. The Knights of the Vale did attempt a futile charge, however, but Lord Royce was able to conduct a brilliant fighting retreat, which evolved into a hit-and-run campaign against the Dothraki, continually whittling down their numbers. But despite this, the Dothraki were making their way closer and closer to the capital. But the Knights of the Vale were able to give the forces of Westeros time to marshal, as the Dothraki would soon encounter a hastily assembled, united Lannister Crownlands army. At the castle of Harrenhal. Now, despite the inexperience and lack of training of this army, they put up a surprisingly tenacious fight, forcing the Dothraki to dismount their horses and fight in the cramped conditions of the ruined castle. But eventually the Dothraki were able to rout this army and moved ever closer to King's Landing. King Bran's small council begged him to flee, but he simply smiled and said he had a plan. That very night, as Carl Hennet gathered his warriors for the final assault, his beautiful white stallion went insane, breaking free of its restraints before trampling the Carl to death in front of all of his people. The Dothraki were horrified to witness such an event, even more so when they realised that the stories about Bran's abilities weren't just fairy tales. The next day, a very timid and defeated Dothraki horde made their way to King's Landing to surrender. From the Great War, to the war against Cersei, to the battle against the Westerosi, the Dothraki numbers had dwindled. They were now a small, defeated people, throwing themselves upon the mercy of one who they considered a demon. Bran, for reasons known only to himself, agreed to give the Dothraki valuable land in the Crown Lands, even agreeing to have Westerosi farmers teach them how to cultivate the land, something the Dothraki were really not happy about. But they really weren't in any position to turn this offer down. In exchange, they would swear their allegiance to King Bran, the Ghost King. While the weak and old farmed, Bran put their warriors to better use, hunting down and destroying the bandits which plagued the countryside. But some Dothraki have rejected Bran's peace and refused to follow his puppet Carl's. They have broken off and have formed raiding parties to raid the countryside. Sooner or later, someone is going to have to confront them. The single most defining event to happen during King Bran's reign so far is the infamous Council of Crows. This was meant to be King Bran's official coronation, where all the lords and ladies of the realm would swear their allegiance to him. In reality, it would be far more controversial. Now, this coronation didn't take place straight away, as there were many events that prevented this, such as the Dothraki Rebellion. So the coronation didn't take place until 5 months into King Bran's reign. The coronation started off with the usual pleasantries and a great tourney to celebrate the king. The next day, the lords and ladies of the realm gathered, each one swearing their allegiance to King Bran. King Bran remained silent, only nodding his head, that is until Lord Bronn said his vow. After Bronn had finished making his vow, King Bran openly in front of all the lords and ladies of the realm removed Sir Bronn from his position as Master of Coin of the Small Council. Going further, King Bran announced it was because of Bronn's mismanagement and embezzling of crown funds. Bronn was both enraged yet slightly relieved. That is because he didn't quite understand the full magnitude of what just happened, as in doing this, King Bran had alienated House Blackwater, but he had gained the support of all the other noble houses of the Reach. He was more than happy to sacrifice the support of one house in order to gain the support of many, but this was nothing compared to what was to come. After the vows had been said, King Bran announced the Iron Reformation. He then had the maesters read out what this said. It was very long and complex, but effectively what it was a plan to centralize power around the Iron Throne. This would limit the power of the individual lords and kingdoms while simultaneously extending the crown's power over them. Local traditions could still be followed, but laws set out by the crown superseded all other local laws. And then there was the royal tithe. Once every 5 years, each of the 6 kingdoms would have to give over a tithe of 1,000 low-born boys of fighting age. The document was very specific. They had to be both healthy and of low birth, as these boys would go into creating a royal army. The reason why they had to be low-born, not high-born, was because high-born boys were born into relative luxury and would still be very loyal to the house that they were born into, whereas these low-borns would not be. They would be born into lives of hardship, therefore they would be more loyal to the crown than their houses. This caused much confusion and outrage, but many forgot King Bran had 10,000 years worth of memories. He had studied those who came before him, and he realised a simple truth: the realm had only prospered under strong central authority. With the exception of a couple of mad kings, the earliest reigns of House Targaryen were the most prosperous of the realm. That is because they had a strong central authority and dragons to enforce this authority, and King Bran saw this royal army as his version of dragons. He actually got this idea from the late King Joffrey, who wanted to build his own royal army, who would be led by strong and capable commanders loyal only to the crown. Many were outraged by this, but King Bran actually copied King Robert's words by asking which was the stronger number, 5 or 1, before holding up one fist and 5 fingers. This debate went on for over a week peak, and in that time 2 distinct camps were formed. Those who agreed with the king and those who were against the king, with Yara Greyjoy being the most outspoken opponent by directly challenging the king's authority. It was noted that she wore her typical grey garments. So those who rejected the Reformation became known as the Greys, and those who supported it became known as the Purples, as King Bran's banner was a purple raven. The Stormlands and the Vale believed that the king's plan had merit, so supported him, with the Riverlands, the Iron Islands and surprisingly the Westerlands being strongly against this. The Reach is officially against this, but many lords in the Reach support this idea. House Martell is also against this, but wish to remain as neutral as they can. For now at least, the royal tithe has been paid, but the Iron Islands and Dorne have not sent the full compliments. But the lines are being drawn. It is a hot day in Meereen, and Daario Naharis is talking to one of his lieutenants. Sir, there must be negotiation. We cannot defeat that combined army. No, I will not negotiate with these people. Grey Worm will come. He has to. In the 2 years since the fall of the Mad Queen, Essos has both changed yet stayed the same. The situation within most of the free cities has largely stayed the same. Of course, they were overjoyed when they heard of the Dragon Queen's demise, but there is a power struggle occurring not between city-states but between mercenary companies. Since the fall of the Golden Company, several other mercenary companies have rose to power to fill the void left behind. One is a very barbaric company called the Sons of the Night, and it is led by a Sarnori called Vantos, and the other major one is known as the Tattered Lions. This is made up of former Lannister soldiers and commanders who were still loyal to their queen Cersei and the memory of their true lord Tywin, and they adamantly refuse to serve the man responsible for their deaths, and they have sworn that one day they will return to Westeros to take their revenge. Far to the south in the island of Naf, things are far more interesting. Grey Worm, determined to keep his promise to his true love Missandei, arrived on the island of Naf with his unsullied army, determined to defend Naf against the pirates. But a few mere hours after the advanced parties made it ashore, they all started to become sick and die. This was due to the dreaded butterfly fever, but determined to keep his promise, Grey Worm instead declared that if he could not protect Naf, he would hunt down and destroy the pirates who were plaguing it. So he and his Unsullied set off for the Basilisk Isles, determined to rid it of the pirates. And after more than 3 months of bloody conquest, the Unsullied finally rid the Basilisk Isles of the pirates, freeing thousands of slaves in the process, many of whom agreed to stay with the Unsullied. Realizing that the Basilisk Isles were the perfect place to intercept slave ships and stop pirate raids, Grey Worm decided to stay there, and the Unsullied, along with many of the freed slaves, stayed with him. So they got to work rebuilding the ancient Valyrian city of Gorgossos. Once it had been rebuilt in a far more defendable place, Grey Worm renamed it to the city of Daenerys after his fallen queen. He then renamed the Basilisk Isles the Dragon Isles, and ruled over them as Lord Protector alongside a council of unsullied and free people. Now to the north, the drums of war are sounding. After the news of the Breaker of Chains' death had reached the Bay of Dragons, the wise masters of Yunkai, with the help of Volantis, retook their city and re-enslaved the people living there. They then sent agitators into the cities of Meereen and Astapor, determined to foment unrest. Daario Naharis, who had fallen into a deep depression after the news of his beloved reached him, was spurred into action by these events. Believing that the council elected to rule the city was too weak, so he overthrew it, declaring himself governor militant and vowing that Meereen would never be a slave city again. To the south, in the city of Astapor, the butcher named Cleon had retaken his throne. Cleon, although a brutal ruler, was a former slave himself and therefore hated the masters, and he swore that he would never be put in chains again. Now, although their leaders don't exactly see eye to eye, the cities of Meereen and Astapor have begrudgingly formed an alliance against the triple alliance of Volantis, Yunkai and New Gis. Knowing that they are outmatched, Daario has sent word to Grey Worm, begging him for help. We must now wait to see what Grey Worm's response is. In the years since the visit of the Mother of Dragons to their fair city, Qarth has changed quite a bit. The fall of the Council of 13 left a power vacuum within the Qarthari elite, one which many tried to fill by initiating a sort of shadow war against each other. This shadow war lasted for nearly 2 years, and saw large amounts of assassination, sabotage and open fighting between the nobility and merchants of Qarth, in order to try and claim power for themselves themselves. Fed up by this, several commanders of the city's garrison initiated a coup, overthrowing the merchants and nobility and placing many under arrest. They would then assume power under a military dictatorship. Under this dictatorship, Qarth would not fare very well. With those responsible for the city's wealth either imprisoned or dead, the Qarthari economy plummeted, and the people blamed the dictatorship. Now Qarth was a city of philosophers, and one philosophy that had gained much popularity was the philosophy of Jon Snow, or the people are sacred. It was preached by an old philosopher called Jura. It was a radical ideology that wanted to do away with what it considered the old ways of the ruling elite. It even claimed that the so-called republics of the world were nothing more than oligarchies, and replace it with a system where everyone was equal and everyone was responsible for their own actions. In his words, he wanted to create a world where everyone was a king or queen of their own realm. Now in most places this kind of ideology wouldn't gain much traction, but in Qarth it did. An example that Ajira would give was to build a pile of stones, making sure that the stone on the bottom was very large and the stone on top was very small. He would then put a gold coin on top, saying the gold coin represented the ruling elite and the large stone at the bottom represented the people. He would then remove the large stone from the bottom, thus the whole structure would fall apart. He also claimed that the same could happen in reality, the people just had to learn their own strength. This ideology quickly spread throughout the city, and the more the dictatorship tried to silence it, the more and more louder it got, until it successfully overthrew the dictatorship, and thus the Qarth Free State was born. But this would not last for very long. The Free State was unable to unite the people as it wanted to, and infighting among the hierarchy meant the Free State was doomed to failure, and only a few months into its rule, a brutal mercenary called Zarton successfully united both the criminal element of the city and whatever was remaining of the military, and overthrew the Free State, declaring himself as emperor. And in an act of cruelty, instead of killing the Free State's leadership, he banished them to the Red Waste. But this would not be the last we would hear of them. He then got to work brutally rebuilding Qarth and its economy, and after he rebuilt Qarth, he would reveal his true intentions. Conscripting every man and woman of fighting age into the new imperial army, Zarton laid out his great plan to turn Qarth into an empire. Ever since the Dothraki left with their great Khaleesi, their sea has been largely barren. The so-called sheep people, who had been tormented by the Dothraki for centuries, have since spread out into their sea, with many small settlements appearing across this great sea. To the north of the Dothraki Sea, the Sarnori have started to reoccupy some of their fallen cities. The Sarnori wish to return their kingdom back to its former glory, but this is no easy task, as many Sarnori believe that their ruined cities are haunted. Further to the east, the Ibbenese have started to resettle ports along the coast as well. Some Dothraki refuse to go with the great Khaleesi, but they are relatively few in numbers, and are not considered to be much of a threat anymore. However, out of the Red Waste, a new faction have emerged. The Jon Snows, exiled by the newly crowned Emperor of Qarth for their radical ideology, which wanted to do away with the old ways of monarchy and oligarchy, and bring about a new world where everyone would be free and equal. The Emperor thought he was being cruel by exiling them, but he didn't realise just how strong they were. They banded together and survived the Red Waste, but their leader, Jura, was not so lucky. With their leader gone, factionalism started to form within the Sacrans as they left the Red Waste, eventually stumbling upon a ruined settlement. Within this settlement, two factions emerged, one which wished to stay closer to the original ideology. They wanted to achieve their goals through peaceful means, and wished for all people to have an equal say. The other faction was more militant, believing that this equality could only be achieved through bloodshed. They also believed that although everyone should be free, there had to be some sort of hierarchy, otherwise it would just fall into anarchy. Eventually things got so heated that both sides ended up by fighting each other, and the peaceful side was defeated and driven out of the settlement. They would head west towards the Bay of Dragons, determined to bring the ideology of Jon Snow to all, with the other faction, now calling themselves the Sacramentum, headed north, determined to bring the Dothraki Sea under their banner. And as they headed north, they encountered settlements of the sheep people, and through one means or another they united them under the banner of the Sacramentum, until they reached the gates of Vale Dothrak, with their army considerably horribly swollen. With no one there to defend it and only a small population left, the city fell without a fight, and it was renamed Vales Populus. From their seat of power, the Sacramentum now plan on extending their dominion across the whole of the Dothraki Sea. In the 2 years since the death of his beloved mother, sightings of the dragon Drogon have been sporadic at best, and it has been very difficult to distinguish between actual sightings and just hearsay. Almost immediately after his mother's fall, he took her body east. Before long, he passed over the great city of Volantis, giving the Volantene a rather serious scare. Since the news had come out that the forces of Cersei had been able to down one of Daenerys' dragons, the free cities and many others desperately scrambled to get their hands on this weapon, and Volantis was able to acquire the blueprints to build these scorpions. Fearing that one day the breaker of chains would come to their city to break the chains of those within, the Volantene built many of these weapons and dotted them throughout their city, and when he flew past, the Volantene scrambled into action. But thankfully on that day there was no bloodshed, and Drogon continued to fly east. For a time, Drogon disappeared within the ruins of Old Valyria, but no one could understand why. That is, apart from one person. King Bran had been watching him and successfully entered his mind, where he began to understand Drogon's feelings. The truth was, Drogon was searching for a family, as he had just lost his mother and his siblings. The truth was, Drogon was lonely. He was alone in this world, or so he thought. After spending many months in Valyria, Drogon suddenly took flight again, heading east in some haste, still clutching his mother's body within his talons. Bran described it as a feeling of being pulled eastwards. It was difficult for him to explain, but it felt like an unseen force was driving Drogon eastwards. Drogon continued on this path for months under the watchful eye of King Bran. That is until he flew past the Shadowlands east of Asshai, to a place where Bran's vision cannot follow. Bran has been trying and trying to project his sight eastwards, but he cannot. In the same way that he cannot project his sight westwards to find his sister. Bran says that whenever he tries to look past a shadow, a strange and horrible cold grips his entire body. A cold that he has not felt since the Night King left his mark upon the young boy. Although he does not truly know what is out there, he describes it as a terrible shadow. A shadow that is coming, and the world had better be prepared when it arrives. The night is dark and cold, yet the sea is very calm and pleasant. However, this cold is familiar and blissful to her. As dim lights start to appear in the distance, Arya Stark feels immense happiness and relief. After 2 long years, she is finally home. In her hands, she clutches a journal full of great and wondrous tales, and oh, what tales she has to tell. As the ship moves closer, the great harbour of Lannisport comes into view. There, waiting for them at the edge of a great pier, stands a hastily assembled welcome party, led by Tyrion Lannister, who was mediating a dispute in the area but dropped everything when he heard that Arya Stark was returning. He is most intrigued to hear of her tales. But across Westeros in King's Landing, something far worse is happening. King Bran has been having nightmarish visions in his sleep until he wakes up with a great scream. His King's Guard, led by Sir Brienne of Tarth, break into the room. King Bran looks at them all and calls them over. "I've seen him." "Seen who, your grace?" "Drogon. He is flying. I can feel him. He's terrified. He's flying across a great valley. A valley of bones." "What kind of bones, your grace?" "Dragon bones. Hundreds of them. I understand now. The Great Shadow was not keeping me out. It was keeping something in." He was interrupted by a messenger quickly bringing the news of Arya Stark's return. "Summon Lord Royce, and do it now." A short time later, Lord Royce enters the room.
You summoned me, your grace.
"Lord Royce, assemble the royal army and contact the Dothraki. Seize the ports along the western coast." Lord Royce, very confused, looks at Sir Brienne before looking back at the king.
Which ones, your grace?
"All of them." And thus the King of Thrones chapter comes to an end, and thus begins a far darker chapter in Westeros' history.